The Order of Nine Angles, O9A, and the Jake Hanrahan situation. Recently, I had an obscure, extremely brief Twitter argument with British journalist and documentary filmmaker Jake Hanrahan. In brief, he worked as a reporter and a producer for Vice News and also on HBO documentaries. In the context of the O9A and me, it's his work mostly on Popular Front that is relevant. In his own words, Popular Front is a grassroots media organisation that focuses solely on war and conflict. We go deeper than any mainstream news in the way that makes it important war coverage accessible for everyone. We are not interested in agendas, political trends, or online arguments. We're also 100% independent. Now, I had no idea who Jake Hanrahan was until our online argument, which in fact was on my end mostly a joke. I also was trying to help him out regarding his work on the O9A, with his researcher's theory seeming to culminate in accusing someone on Twitter as being David Matt himself. He seems to believe that the 72 or 73-year-old Matt is now nothing but, quote, a Twitter troll. Before I go into this, I wish to say I respect the idea of Popular Front, the news organisation. In fact, Jake Hanrahan essentially has my dream job. I believe, despite not agreeing with his politics, which do affect everything that he does in his work, that is not a criticism, just a reality of his agenda, which permeates through everything he does. Now, despite this, I think his ideal of Popular Front is a very respectable enterprise, but he cannot seem to be objective. And his description I read above is not very accurate, especially regarding we are not interested in agendas, political trends, or online arguments. However, I must state, Popular Front itself has not personally attacked me with what is essentially slander and defamation. It was Jake Hanrahan himself who did this, which is his own personal agency, not that of his organisation. So I'm not calling Popular Front out as being hypocritical, just Jake Hanrahan himself. Now, why am I even bothering talking about this? Well, I believe before I can truly go into the real O9A, based upon my contacts, I have to sort out some of the worst misinformation. Now, I've already covered in my introduction video the Martinet Press situation and the Department of Justice documented evidence of proof that Martinet Press was run by an FBI operator, Josh Sutter. I have already gone into this from an intelligence perspective, and that will not change. I will also disclose I cannot link any references to core O9A or David Matt material, as the designated terrorist designation of the O9A means I could be seen as distributing terrorist material and propaganda, which is why I cannot link it. However, the Department of Justice documents on Sutter are all available on Scribd and other websites regarding his government documented work for the FBI. I recommend looking into it, as it is definitive evidence of intelligence involvement. And I can point people to this as it is the DOJ public document and not O9A material. I had to make this clear after thinking about it. It's all out there regarding the material, however, knowing where to find it or where to look, it is very difficult. Now, moving on so I can get into my next video, which is the core original O9A and what they actually were, I must address this petty but important incident. Jake Hanrahan and I clashed on Twitter. I'll leave a link in the description to my Twitter post where I screenshot the incident which took place on the 26th of January 2023. Essentially, I noticed Jake Hanrahan accusing someone on Twitter of being David Matt. He then linked a podcast with his evidence. I clicked on it and was annoyed about the paywall. I know for a fact that the accused person on Twitter is not David Matt. I can't go into how I know this, but I know who they are and others. None are Matt. So I replied, not knowing who Jake Hanrahan was. And I said, there's been a little bit of a dick, but you know. Nice paywall, always a sign of journalistic integrity. I really have the wrong business model. Also, that aside, your theory is not correct. I know for a certainty they are not David Matt. You have fallen down a rabbit hole. Look at it from multiple angles, which I wrote all in caps as a joke. Then you will see. Then, approximately 3 minutes after I made that post, all documented on my Twitter link, which will be in the description, Jake Hanrahan replied with, quote, "You're an O9A propagandist posing as a journalist. Be gone." End quote. And I was blocked before I could even reply. A screenshot of being blocked is also in my Twitter post with pictures of the incident. I then, after uploaded the 3 screenshots of what happened, and on Twitter saying, quote, 1. All I said was that he was wrong in his accusation of someone on Twitter being David Matt. 2. I made a joke when capitalizing angles. 3. I am not an O9A propagandist pretending to be a journalist. If you watch my videos, you would know that. End quote. The only reason I'm even addressing this is because of his investigation into the O9A and the suspicious nature of Jake Hanrahan's career as a foreign correspondent. Now, Jake Hanrahan is propagating a sensational and typical mainstream narrative of the O9A and David Matt. He is currently one of the worst in this regard. So to dispel this mainstream narrative is instrumental to be able to get to the actual truth, good or bad, about this whole mess. I am well aware that me talking about Jake Hanrahan does serve the interests of my O9A contacts, and I am very mindful of how I approach this investigation, as to not fall too far one way or the other into losing all objectivity. As a journalist, it is very difficult to not either become increasingly resentful of a contact over time or increasingly sympathetic. I am going to go into some of the behind-the-scenes issues journalists have to go through using the example of a hero of mine, Australian war correspondent Michael Ware, who did amazing work for Time on the war in East Timor, Afghanistan, and most famously his coverage of the war in Iraq for Time and CNN. His 2015 documentary, Only the Dead, all based on footage he took from his camcorder during his years in Iraq, is in my opinion the best war documentary ever made, and for me personally, the most impactful piece of journalism outside of writing I've ever seen. I highly recommend people to watch this amazing work. Michael Ware was heavily focused on making contacts with insurgent groups and even went with Iraqi Mujahideen insurgents on strike against the Americans. He was also the main contact for Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Most of the Al-Qaeda in Iraq suicide bombing footage, beheadings, and terrorist propaganda footage of snipers killing US soldiers only surfaced because they literally gave it to the Australian journalist Michael Ware. And they did that because he was the only journalist, other than the likes of the Russian war photographer Yuri Kozyrev, who actually went over to the other side to get their perspective. Why do I bring this up? Well, Michael Ware is the best modern example of a foreign or war correspondent you could get. He kept contacts on all sides, from being embedded with the US Marine Corps during the worst fighting of the war in Iraq, to also going on raids with Iraqi Mujahideen, fighting and trying to kill the Americans he was embedded with. To put things simply, Michael Ware went through hell as a foreign correspondent. And it was not just the hell of war he went through. The behind-the-scenes events that take place as a foreign correspondent, not just independent, but corporate-backed, like Michael Ware, is beyond comprehension to most. As a foreign correspondent, the public will only see about 5%, to be allegorical, of the work usually done in the background, and the extreme stress and constant danger is never usually revealed. I know this for people who go to foreign countries, particularly in places where you have no place to be, places inaccessible to anyone other than someone who has contacts in their dangerous work. Now, for example, Michael Ware, like Jake Hanrahan, had corporate backing during his time overseas, with either Time magazine or CNN. He was treated terribly, particularly by CNN. Michael Ware was thrown into terrible situations, and as soon as anything that did not essentially serve the corporate agenda happened, he was completely left to his own devices. No help at all. You're essentially scum to them. Little more than a grunt. Just another person to throw into the meat grinder and essentially be replaced. This is not always the case, but it was the case with Michael Ware. I can't imagine the level of hell he went through going on behind the scenes, dealing with militants, insurgents, terrorists, multiple coalition governments, the intelligence services in particular, and foreign police. I am not claiming to be anything like Michael Ware, but I will give some generalizations of what people have to go through. I do this because Jake Hanrahan is well known as a foreign correspondent who goes to places. He usually ends up meeting far left militant groups, etc. But unlike Michael Ware and most foreign correspondents, he seems to have a very, very easy time getting access and getting in and out of these places, and doesn't seem to have a lot of the behind the scenes bullshit you have to go through. Now, to be concise on the hidden world of overseas journalistic endeavours, I want you to imagine you are a foreign correspondent. Now, you'd arrive at an airport after a 14-hour flight and instantly get taken as soon as you go through the process of sorting out your visa by intelligence officers. You are accused of being a foreign intelligence officer and interrogated, accused of espionage, or to try and help terrorist organizations to subvert and destabilize the current government regime. However, with a bribe from your contact, they would let you go. But once you're taken away and imprisoned, you are fucked. The bribe only works if you do it straight away. Then after all that, you would have terrible problems in the communities you would be embedded in, like living in terrible poverty, becoming violently ill in the case of South Asian countries in particular, with malaria and viruses back to back, usually needing to organize at least a month in advance to recover and have your immune system adapt to the conditions before you are even able to begin your work. You have to take opium and morphine to stop dysentery and unending diarrhea that would persist even after the malaria and viruses burnt through. Opiates are the only thing that can stop you from having diarrhea 30 times a day. I am not being hyperbolic. There is also the terrible food preparation with no hygienic protocols in place. Nothing is safe to eat and nothing is safe to drink. Then you will deal with people who may try and kidnap you. You would get militant or terrorist group potentially putting you in very bad situations. Even in some of the more safer places in the Middle East, where at least the weather, despite being 50 degrees Celsius most of the time, it's essentially a holiday compared to South Asia. But even in these so-called safer places, you may have people try and lure you into either killing you or kidnapping you. The only contacts with invested interests are safe. All others must be suspect. that is probably the best advice I can give to anybody if they ever want to do work in the field as a foreign correspondent or a war correspondent. The only contacts you can actually trust are essentially ones that have an invested interest in you being alive. Anyone else, no. You have to be very careful in real life in particular. Now, you would also have constant problems with intelligence services. People breaking into your hotel room constantly. Girls trying to set you up in honeypot situations. All this kind of shit goes on in the background. Then you have problems with your own country's intelligence agencies once you arrive home. To end it there, that is what it's like, at least the unsexy dangers of what independent foreign correspondents, and in many cases, like with Michael Ware, who was a corporate-backed foreign correspondent, who, quote, boasted of having, quote, every virus and parasite known to man, etc., have to go through. But when I look into Jake Hanrahan, I don't see any of this for the most part, other than him being in prison for 2 weeks in Turkey. I have no idea how a man of similar age to me can get access in and out of places you are not supposed to be, talk to people you're not supposed to talk to, let alone find, then go on his merry way. As an investigative journalist myself who deals with organizations designated as terrorist organizations, or ones frowned upon like the current Taliban emirate, I am under constant stress that I will be misunderstood and raided by my own government for my investigative work. Even making this video is like walking on thin ice. But to be honest, I love this work. But I'm very suspicious of people like Jake Hanrahan. Now, I'm not attacking him personally. I in no way want people to harass the man in any way. It's just that I circumstantially find the evidence based upon the experience of many in this field of work and the experiences of those famous for it. Jake Hanrahan has had a very smooth ride, which indicates possible association with the intelligence services, in his case MI6, or the British Secret Intelligence Service. To be clear, I am not saying he is MI6, only that people like myself and many others who have experience in this work cannot work out how he could have done it and had the access he had. I am not the only person to bring up this sort of conspiracy theory about Jake Hanrahan, and then, you know, people on all kinds of places, Reddit, naturally, of course, Stormfront. Not saying I'm associated with any of that or far-right stuff, but people in general who have absolutely no political association. I bring this all up to get it out of the way in one video. Now, I'm going to quickly read a few questions from my contact in the O9A, who asked regarding Jake Hanrahan's investigation into the O9A. Now, to be clear, these are not my own words or opinions, just some of my contacts. Now, my contact is asking these questions regarding the Jake Hanrahan investigation in the O9A. But I'm going to pose it to Jake Hanrahan himself to see if he will answer these questions. I doubt he will, but you never know. So, to quote liberally my contact, I have so many questions from my contact. I'm only going to ask a few to try and keep things a bit more minimal. 1. Jake Hanrahan. Why have they never bothered to find and investigate Sutter since they based their post-2018 anti-O9A narrative and campaign around Sutter's black propaganda, incitement, and undercover activities? 2. Why have they being Jake Hanrahan, Popular Front, and the people researching and investigating regarding the O9A and his investigation? Why have they never investigated the origins and profits of Sutter's Martinet Press and discovered where the profits went, or why Sutter is not being prosecuted for his failure to pay tax in regards to these profits? 3. Why have they never investigated who authored the anonymous books that Martinet Press published? Whether the authors were paid to write them, and if so, who paid them, and whether the authors received any of the profits made by Martinet Press. 4. Why have they never made any comments about Sutter's testimony at the criminal trial in 2021 of Caleb Cole, and asked, why did Sutter travel around America on FBI expenses, use surveillance equipment, and go undercover for years, since those are not the actions of someone they claim is a mere confidential informant, but rather the actions of a paid agent provocateur? And why was Sutter paid a living wage of US $78,133.20 plus the expenses of $4,378.60 by the FBI between February 7, 2018 and early 2020? And 3. Was he still being paid by the FBI before and after the trial of Caleb Cole? Alright, there's a lot more questions, but for now I'll just put those out. And by the way, you can find out all this information by looking at the trial of Caleb Cole published by the Department of Justice in America, and it's on Scribed. It goes on and on, but I need to try and keep this video not too long. So, to conclude, this information produced by media organizations and lack of objectivity in any form is, in my opinion, the biggest problem other than Martinet Press in being able to work out what is actually going on. I respect what Jake Hanrahan is trying to do, and on many levels he does succeed. It's only in this O9A related content that I am addressing the situation. I just had to address not just his O9A investigation, but also the reality for many behind the scenes in anyone going somewhere they have no place to be. I have no definitive evidence, like with Sutter, but it all serves the same purpose. Now, a question I will leave you with is, does this serve the O9A? And is this actually something inadvertently beneficial to them? By that, I am referring to investigations by people like Jake Hanrahan and intelligence operated fake corporate companies, book publishers like Martinet Press. Now think about that. My next video will go into how the original O9A operated and how they perceive the current O9A and future O9A. Asabiah is a clue. Cycles will always permeate. Now that I have pushed the pretenders, the intelligence operations, and now some of the media misinformation aside, I can go into what I know the O9A to be. Thank you for watching and the support. Asabiah is a clue. Cycles will always permeate.